And Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, what just transpired in the very few minutes of questions and answer provides ample credence as to why this motion today is most relevant and most critical, because this motion reads for members of the Tobago public: whereas the Executive Council has demonstrated a disregard for transparency, accountability, and good governance in its reporting to the Tobago House of Assembly, and whereas the failure of secretaries to provide timely responses to written questions on general administrative issues of divisions, including but not limited to finance, procurement, ethics, and other issues of significant public interest, deprives the House and the public of critical information, including matters related. Be it resolved that this House highlights that members of the Executive Council have failed to provide responses to written questions, and urges that all outstanding responses to questions for written answers be submitted without further delay. And be it further resolved that this House supports the Standing Orders Committee to consider and recommend an appropriate amendment to the standing orders to establish a definitive time frame for the submission of written answers and to prescribe consequences for non-compliance. And Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, while this motion treats with the issue of written questions, what was just pellucidly displayed before us is that this administration...
Remember, you're going into a motion without the motion even having a seconder. So I would like to, you would have your opportunity to expand on your motion. Is there a seconder for this motion?
Huh? No, the motion input move yet? So I have to finish the presentation and then we...
Wait.
Sorry.
All right, sorry. Go ahead.
So, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, as I was saying, though this motion is specific to written questions, what is pellucidly clear is that this administration, they have demonstrated to all of Tobago that they are hell-bent on disregarding transparency, accountability, and good governance. Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, this House, which we have dubbed the People's House, is so named because we are servants of the people. And therefore, the questions that are asked on behalf of the people. And the answers that should be provided on behalf and to the people to whom we are all elected and in some instances appointed to serve. And therefore, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, it is an absolute abomination that when questions are filed in this House, some as far back as January 2023, 2 years later. 2 years later, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, there's no answer to be had. Say what you want about the minority leader, the minority councillor, the minority. But ultimately, the non-responsiveness of this administration is a disrespect not only to this House, Honorable House, but to every resident of Tobago, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer. Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, and what makes this even more concerning is the fact that when you peruse the unanswered questions, only one member remains without, is compliant. One member, and that is the leader of Assembly Business. Every other secretary, including the chief secretary, is in contempt of this House and has failed on many occasions to respond to important questions. And Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, the question and answer period is one of those opportunities that allows for the House to do that which it is empowered to do. Scrutinize, review, provide oversight, hold members accountable, get information, share information, and keep the House apprised of the governance of this island. And when you have persons in the position as the chief secretary, the head of the executive, being non-compliant, then we know as an island that our business, our management of our affairs is in deep and dire straits. Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, I would just like to share with you some examples of the questions that are currently unanswered based on our records. And even share with you name and shame based on our records, the persons who are so culpable. Chief Secretary, based on our records, over 20 questions, including those on overseas travel, consultancies, carnival expenditure, and the oil spill cleanup. The Secretary for Infrastructure, who up to this point has not showed up without any sort of excuse to answer a question. He is on record as not answering 10 questions, some relating to multi-million-dollar roadworks, procurement irregularities, and even a project near his personal property. The Deputy Chief Secretary has failed to respond to several questions concerning hiring and expenditure in her division. The Secretary of Tourism, Culture and Antiquities, who, aside from the member of Roxborough, is perhaps the most absent member of this House, failed to answer over 5 questions concerning hiring and expenditure in her division. Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, the new minted Secretary of Finance, only a couple months of age, but has failed to answer 3 questions on the job. The Secretary of Agriculture, she has ignored over 6 questions, including matters of the shark attack. And of course, the Secretary of Settlements has also failed to answer and provide answers to questions. Mr. Deputy Presiding Officers, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, these figures paint a troubling picture. This, to me, while one you may say is a one-off, but this to me paints a picture of something that is systemic and sustained, and therefore, as a House, we must find a way to regulate and call these members to account. Because it cannot be in a place where we are duty-bound to provide and be transparent and be accountable to the people of Tobago that members are flouting these standing orders. Members are refusing to provide the answers, and there seems to be little or nothing we as a House can do. Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, I've looked at jurisdictions near and far. Our Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, for instance. I've looked at the UK Parliament. I've looked at other Commonwealth parliaments, such as the Canadian Parliament. And what all of these parliaments have in common is the fact that there are consequences and there are clear timelines as to when questions must be answered, whether written or oral, and there are consequences for non-refusal of answering these questions. And therefore, it is for this reason I am strongly submitting that we as a House today also consider proposals to treat with this matter once and for all. Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, in treating with this motion, we had to reconcile questions, because what I noticed as well is that whereas we would have, based on our records, a number of questions unanswered, and when we check with the Assembly Legislature, they would have on record a different number of questions unanswered, and even on the side of the executive, based on my information, they are saying that the information as shared with them by the legislature perhaps is inconsistent with their information. And therefore, it also suggests to me that somewhere along the documentation and repository of this information, there is some challenges, some shortcomings, which must also be addressed and rectified. But the point of it all, and there's without a doubt, based on all the information, is that notwithstanding the accuracy of the numbers of what is outstanding, the fact is this administration has had a history, a long history dating back from at least January 2023 of not responding to questions. And the reason why this is important and important to the people of Tobago, as I said, some of these questions treat with the expenditure of multi-million-dollar contracts. In one case, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, one of the questions dealt with roads, and we've been asking about the procurement of roads and how these roads were procured. Roads cumulatively cost over $150 million. Roads where we were told and given commitments that no payment will be made until the roads are completed. And based on our information, we are hearing to be confirmed, but not responded to, that payments were made in contradiction to the guarantees that were given to this House. And therefore, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, it is important that explanations are given if the information is true as to why you would give a commitment to the House that your arrangements is such that you have a deferred payment arrangement where no payment will be made until the project is completed 9 months in the first instance and a final 18 months thereafter. And only to hear that that has been retracted, payments have been made without the approval or even coming to the House and alerting the House that this commitment I gave to you as a House, we are now reverting from that decision, and give an explanation. Because you are not giving the explanation to me, you're giving the explanation to the people of Tobago so they can understand how their monies are being spent. Because, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, the people of Tobago must be aware that perhaps the question and answer mechanism is but the only functional way of holding this current administration to account. Because at this time, we are making some headway, thankfully, with the Public Accounts Committee, but we have not been able to have one inquiry after 3.5 years. And therefore, this opportunity is but the most effective means of scrutiny, public scrutiny, we have available to us here on the island. And even in trying to ensure that there's transparency and accountability, we are having a situation where members are ducking, hiding, and in some instances, simply refusing to answer. And this is an administration that gave the people of Tobago the assurance that we will be so accountable. In fact, I remember the Deputy Chief Secretary saying to Tobagonians that they will be so accountable when it comes to the procurement process of goods and services that they would establish this website. And on this website, any Tobagonian can go on that website and get information on any contract that has been awarded. They could see the date of the contract, the persons who bid, how much they bid, and who the contract was awarded to. That was the commitment. And after so giving that commitment, when the people entrusted in you the ability to come and govern, now when questions are being asked, you are simply refusing to answer. If that isn't a breach of trust and that pact with the people, I do not know what is. Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, we have a situation where we have asked about travel. And specifically, we have zeroed in on the division of tourism, transport, and antiquities, or however it is, antiquities and transport. And the reason why we have zeroed in on that division is because almost every Monday morning, someone from that division is on some expedition outside of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, that up to this point that question has been filed, we have not been able to get a true and full disclosure as to what is the exact cost overall.
Deputy Presiding Officer, a point of clarity to the minority leader. Didn't the member for Roxborough Argyle ask that question and an oral answer was given by the Secretary of Tourism in the last sitting? I'm just trying to get that clear. If the minority leader to Roxborough Argyle, if he didn't ask a question in the House for oral answer to the Secretary of Tourism, Culture, Antiquities and Transportation, and she spent quite some time bringing clarity to that.
So this is why we are on written question, because the difference between an oral question and a written question, it allows you to get more detail. And therefore, this question was filed before. So even if the question got on the order paper, it is of no fault to the minority because the question was for written, and there's a difference between written, because what we would have asked for, and that is why it should have allowed me to continue, we asked for details as to who on every trip. We want to know every trip you went on. We want to know the contingent. Who were the persons who went with you? We want to know what was the per diem received, what was airfare. We want to know where you went, why you went, how you went. So that is the purpose of written questions. It is questions that cannot be properly elucidated within the short space of time for oral. Then you have to put a prepared, detailed presentation to the answer. And therefore, that question, the reason why that question is important, because when we do our calculation, the secretary alone, perhaps by now, would have received per diem of over $500,000. And that to me is alarming, that while we have people could barely get a job, people could barely get food, grocery, and so, one member of this assembly in per diem alone would have received over $500,000. And perhaps that is the reason why she doesn't want to answer the question, because we'll be able to verify and validate once and for all whether that information that is coming to us is true. So, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer and people of Tobago, I want you to understand that when we come here and we are reporting to you that we have asked some very important questions, and the members refuse to answer these questions, and when we peruse the standing orders of this assembly as currently constructed, there is little to nothing that we can do except to have this debate that we are having here, so that members with good conscience, if they really truly believe in transparency, accountability, and good governance, will all agree for us to fix this issue once and for all by having their colleagues answer the questions that are outstanding without delay, and two, by also giving and instructing the Standing Orders Committee to treat with this matter as a matter of importance, because I know at this time the Standing Orders Committee is wrapping up some of their work, and perhaps we can add this as a point of reference so that they can include in the wrapping up of their work as an important element to treat with, because without consequences, this will continue, and today it is me complaining as a minority, but perhaps in 6 months, it might just be you on the other side who would be on this side complaining. So, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, one of my responsibility as minority leader is to leave this space better than I met it. And this is one issue I think we all, as a house, can agree to, that it matters not who sits in the seat, that we need to fix, and we need to fix now. I have some recommendations which I will like to share based on looking at what happens, for example, in the United Kingdom. I would share with you what happens, right. So in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, I think it's Standing Order 25.6, mandates that a minister must respond to a question on notice within 21 days unless otherwise directed by the Speaker. There is a mechanism to follow up with a request for an oral explanation if the reply is not forthcoming. This protects the integrity of the parliamentary process. And what I also noticed today, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, which also needs to be addressed, is that in other jurisdictions, when a member is absent, it does not provide the executive with a cop-out. Usually, that question is answered by either a designated member, whether it be the junior member of the ministry or the leader of assembly business, usually takes up, because we have a situation here where one member, she has missed 2 consecutive sittings, and it means questions from the previous sitting has questions, they have been deferred, and questions from this sitting they are now also being deferred. And if she doesn't show up for the next sitting, it means that once she's not here, those questions, and some of them after a while, becomes irrelevant to the climate. So therefore, it is important that this is something that we also consider once we all agree that there are issues to be treated with when it comes to us treating with questions and answers. And that is the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. In the UK House of Commons, Standing Order 22C requires that ministers provide a response to written questions within a maximum of 7 sitting days for ordinary written questions. Of course, we meet once a month, so that perhaps the time frame is not realistic for our purposes, and 5 days for named day questions. Failure, what I like about this one here, failure to respond can lead to a formal complaint to the procedure committee or even the speaker, and there are consequences to be had. In Canada's House of Commons, Standing Order 39.5 obliges a minister to respond to written questions within 45 calendar days. I think this is a fair number. Failure to do so triggers a procedural right for the members to raise the issue during question period under a Standing Order 52 adjournment debate, effectively forcing public answers in the chamber. And I particularly like this because it means that the member must be held to account and is held up to account in a public manner. Because what I recognize is, to the credit, after a period of being very tardy with oral questions, the executive, they have improved in that regard, and it's because all of Tobago is seeing them having to be responding to these oral questions. But the written questions are simply on the order paper, and because we don't have a name and shame kind of arrangement, they go basically without any sort of oversight. And therefore the public doesn't even know until perhaps now that so many questions are on the order paper unanswered. So what do I propose? This pattern must be addressed, and it therefore requires us to find a way to have this dealt with in a formal manner. And as I said, we would definitely need to have the Standing Orders Committee do its work, look at the time period for questions and answer, look at what is an appropriate consequence for those who fail to answer, and therefore, Mr. Presiding Officer, once this is had, it would ensure that those who surreptitiously and skillfully attempt to make their way around and skirt the provisions of the standing orders and avoid answering to the people of Tobago will be held accountable once and for all. Mr. Presiding Officer, just want to say to the people of Tobago, you are the ones that hold the key. We are your servants. You employ us. And you ultimately have to hold those you entrust with the responsibility to govern your affairs. You are the ones to hold them ultimately accountable. And you need to do your analysis, because every so often, people come to you for their votes. And when they come to you singing all kinds of sweet melodies. And they will tell you the moon and the stars. But ultimately, you have to do the analysis and assess whether what was told to you and what is actually being delivered in action or through policies or just through these very sittings, whether those promises are being kept. I reminded you about the promise to have that website that ought to be an avenue of transparency in procurement. And the question is, where is that website? I remind you of their promise to levy fix this, including being more accountable, being more transparent. And the question you have to ask yourself is, have they fixed this? And as I wrap up, on Monday, you, the people of Tobago, have an opportunity. You have an opportunity to determine whether you are, in the first instance, comfortable with what so far has been promised and what has been delivered, including the commitment to be transparent, the commitment to be accountable, and the commitment to answer the questions that is asked on your behalf. And therefore, with those few words, Mr. Deputy Presiding Officer, I so beg to move.